Tom had always prided himself on his work ethic. He had taken the job as a night watchman at the old, abandoned factory on the edge of town because it was easy money and gave him the solitude he craved. The factory had been shut down for years, and there was little to do other than patrol the grounds and make sure no vandals or curious teenagers found their way inside. The factory itself was a relic of the past, a sprawling complex of decaying buildings and rusted machinery. The locals whispered about its dark history, accidents, disappearances, and rumors of the place being haunted. Tom didn't believe in such nonsense. He was a practical man, and ghosts were the last thing on his mind. One particularly cold and moonless night, Tom arrived for his shift and settled into his routine. He made his rounds, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the thick darkness. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old building settling and the distant hoot of an owl. Around midnight, Tom was in the main building, checking the security monitors in the small office. The screens showed various angles of the factory grounds, all empty and still. As he sipped his coffee, he noticed a flicker on one of the monitors. He leaned in, adjusting the focus. There, in the shadowy corner of the courtyard, he saw a figure standing still. Probably just some kids, he muttered to himself, grabbing his flashlight and heading out to investigate. Tom walked through the dimly lit corridors, the sound of his footsteps echoing off the walls. He reached the courtyard and swept his flashlight across the area. There was no one there. He frowned and called out, "Hey, this is private property. You need to leave." There was no response. He walked to the spot where he had seen the figure, but there were no footprints, no signs that anyone had been there. Shaking his head, he chalked it up to a trick of the light or his tired eyes playing tricks on him. He returned to the office and resumed his watch. An hour later, the monitors flickered again. This time, the figure was closer, standing in the hallway just outside the office. Tom felt a chill run down his spine. He grabbed his flashlight and rushed out, determined to catch whoever was messing with him. The hallway was empty. Tom's heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the area. He felt a cold draft and heard a faint whisper like someone calling his name. "Tom!" He spun around, his flashlight beam darting wildly. "Who's there?" he shouted, but there was no reply. The factory seemed to close in around him, the shadows growing longer and darker. He felt an inexplicable sense of dread. He returned to the office, locking the door behind him. He sat down, trying to calm his racing heart. He checked the monitors again, and his blood ran cold. The figure was now inside the office, standing right behind him. Tom turned slowly, flashlight shaking in his hand, but the room was empty. Panic set in. He grabbed his phone and called his supervisor. "Jack, something weird is going on here. I keep seeing someone on the monitors, but there's no one here." "Calm down, Tom," Jack replied. "It's probably just your mind playing tricks on you. The factory can be a creepy place at night. Just finish your shift and we'll talk about it in the morning." Tom hung up, feeling more alone than ever. He checked the monitors again, but the figure was gone. He decided to stay in the office for the rest of his shift, not wanting to venture out into the dark, labyrinthine factory. As the hours dragged on, Tom felt a growing sense of unease. The temperature in the office seemed to drop, and he could see his breath forming in front of him. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. "Tom, come to us." Desperate to make it through the night, Tom tried to distract himself by reading an old magazine he found in the drawer. But the whispers wouldn't stop. They seemed to be coming from the very walls, growing louder and more frantic. Suddenly, the lights in the office flickered and went out, plunging Tom into darkness. His flashlight sputtered and died, leaving him with only the glow of the security monitors. On the screens, he saw the figure again. No, multiple figures, all standing in a circle around the office. Tom felt a presence behind him, a cold hand on his shoulder. He turned slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. There, in the dim light of the monitors, he saw them. Ghostly apparitions, their faces twisted in anguish, their eyes hollow and staring. "Join us, Tom," they whispered in unison, their voices echoing in his mind. Tom screamed and bolted for the door, but it wouldn't open. The apparitions closed in, their cold hands reaching for him. He felt his strength leaving him, his vision blurring. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the ghostly faces surrounding him, their mouths open in silent screams. When the morning shift arrived, they found the office empty. Tom was nowhere to be seen, his belongings left behind. The security monitors showed only static, and the factory was silent once more. Tom was never found, and the rumors of the haunted factory grew stronger. Some say you can still hear his screams echoing through the halls at night, a warning to those who dare to take the midnight watch at the old factory. Jenna had just started her night shift at Meadow Creek Hospital, a once bustling facility now on the verge of closure. The hospital had been running on a skeleton crew for months, with most of the wards shut down and only a handful of patients remaining. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and the lingering memories of those who had come and gone. Jenna liked the quiet of the night shift. She enjoyed the solitude and the chance to catch up on paperwork without constant interruptions. But tonight felt different. There was an unsettling stillness in the air, as if the building itself was holding its breath. As the clock struck midnight, Jenna heard the distant sound of a child's laughter echoing down the empty hallways. She frowned, knowing there were no children currently admitted. She brushed it off, attributing it to her imagination, and continued with her rounds. An hour later, she was checking the vitals of Mr. Thompson, an elderly patient recovering from surgery. As she adjusted his IV, she noticed a shadow moving in her peripheral vision. She turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Mr. Thompson stirred and mumbled, "They're here again." Jenna's heart skipped a beat. "Who's here, Mr. Thompson?" "The children," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "They come every night." Jenna tried to reassure him, but her own unease was growing. She finished her rounds and returned to the nurse's station. The hospital felt colder than usual, and the lights seemed to flicker more frequently. She decided to make herself a cup of coffee to calm her nerves. As she waited for the coffee to brew, the lights in the break room flickered and went out completely. Jenna felt a chill run down her spine. She fumbled for her flashlight and turned it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. She could hear faint whispers, like a conversation just out of reach. "Hello, is anyone there?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. The whispers stopped abruptly. She took a deep breath and decided to check the electrical panel in the basement. Maybe there was a simple explanation for the power issues. The basement was even colder than the rest of the hospital, and Jenna felt a sense of dread as she descended the stairs. The air was thick, and her flashlight flickered ominously. She reached the electrical panel and opened it, finding nothing unusual. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut behind her, and Jenna's flashlight went out. She was plunged into total darkness. Panic surged through her as she tried to turn the flashlight back on, but it was dead. She fumbled for her phone and turned on the flashlight app, its weak light barely illuminating her surroundings. In the dim light, she saw a movement at the far end of the basement. A small figure, barely more than a shadow, stood there watching her. Jenna's breath caught in her throat. The figure started to move towards her, and she could hear the faint sound of children's laughter. Terrified, Jenna ran back up the stairs, only to find the door locked. She banged on it desperately, but it wouldn't budge. The laughter grew louder, echoing around her. She turned to see the figure standing at the bottom of the stairs, joined by several others. They were children, their eyes hollow and their faces pale and expressionless. Jenna's mind raced. She had to get out of there. She remembered there was another exit through the maintenance room. She ran towards it, her heart pounding. The children's laughter followed her, growing more sinister. She reached the maintenance room and threw open the door, scrambling inside and slamming it shut behind her. She leaned against the door, panting, trying to catch her breath. The room was filled with old hospital equipment covered in dust and cobwebs. As she tried to calm down, she heard a soft voice behind her. "Why are you hiding from us?" Jenna spun around, her flashlight revealing a young girl standing in the corner. The girl looked sad, her eyes filled with sorrow. "We just want to play," she said. Jenna's fear gave way to confusion. "Who are you?" "We used to live here," the girl replied, "but now we're stuck." Jenna felt a wave of pity for the ghostly child. "How can I help you?" The girl's expression brightened. "You need to find the old records room. There's something there that will set us free." Jenna nodded, determined to help. She knew where the records room was, on the 3rd floor, in the abandoned wing. Gathering her courage, she made her way back upstairs. The hospital was eerily silent, and the lights flickered ominously. As she approached the records room, the temperature dropped sharply. Jenna pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was filled with dusty file cabinets and old medical records. She searched through them, looking for anything that might help. In the back of the room, she found an old journal, its pages yellowed with age. As she flipped through it, she discovered it belonged to Dr. Whitaker, a doctor who had worked at the hospital many years ago. The journal detailed unethical experiments conducted on children in the hospital's basement. The children had died, and their spirits had been trapped ever since. Jenna realized she needed to expose the truth to free the spirits. She took the journal and left the records room, heading back to the nurses' station. She called the local news station and arranged for them to come in the morning. As dawn broke, the news crew arrived, and Jenna handed them the journal. The story of the haunted hospital and the trapped spirits quickly spread. That night, as Jenna prepared for her shift, the hospital felt different. The air was lighter, and the oppressive feeling was gone. Jenna knew the spirits had been set free. She looked around the now peaceful hospital, feeling a sense of accomplishment. She had faced her fears and uncovered the dark secrets of Meadow Creek Hospital, ensuring the spirits could finally rest in peace. Kevin had been working the night shift at Everglow Convenience Store for nearly 6 months. The store, located on the outskirts of town, rarely saw customers after midnight, leaving Kevin with long, lonely hours to fill. It was a quiet, uneventful job, and that's exactly how he liked it. One cold, windy night, Kevin arrived at the store to start his shift. The air was biting, and the streets were deserted. The store's fluorescent lights flickered as he unlocked the door and stepped inside. He greeted the day shift worker, Julie, who looked eager to leave. "Quiet night?" Kevin asked. "Yeah, nothing unusual," Julie replied, grabbing her coat. "Just the way we like it. See you tomorrow." Kevin nodded and watched as she left, locking the door behind her. The store was small, with narrow aisles and shelves stocked with all sorts of items. Kevin settled behind the counter, pulling out a book to pass the time. Around 1 a.m., a loud clang echoed from the back of the store. Kevin looked up, startled. He listened for a moment, but everything was silent again. He shrugged it off, assuming it was just the old building settling. Half an hour later, the same noise rang out, louder this time. Kevin felt a chill run down his spine. He decided to check it out, grabbing a flashlight from under the counter. He walked to the back of the store where the storage room was located. The door to the storage room was slightly ajar. Kevin hesitated, then pushed it open with a creak. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing rows of shelves packed with supplies. Everything seemed in order, but then he noticed a large metal canister had fallen off one of the shelves. Kevin sighed in relief. "Must have been the wind," he muttered, though he knew it didn't make much sense. He picked up the canister and placed it back on the shelf, then turned to leave. As he reached the door, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He felt like he was being watched. He spun around, shining the flashlight across the room. There was nothing there. Just as he was about to step out, he heard a faint whisper. "Kevin." He froze. His heart pounded in his chest. "Who's there?" he called out, trying to sound braver than he felt. There was no response. He quickly shut the door and hurried back to the front of the store, locking the storage room door behind him. Back at the counter, Kevin tried to shake off the feeling of unease. He turned on the small radio they kept behind the counter, hoping some music would calm his nerves. The familiar tunes filled the store, but the sense of being watched didn't go away. Around 3 a.m., Kevin was startled by a sudden blackout. The entire store plunged into darkness, the only light coming from his flashlight. The radio went silent, and the store was eerily quiet. Kevin's breath quickened as he fumbled for his phone, but there was no signal. A loud knock came from the front door. Kevin jumped, dropping his flashlight. He picked it up and pointed it towards the door. A figure stood outside, barely visible through the glass. Kevin approached cautiously. "Sorry, we're closed," Kevin called out, his voice shaky. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at him. Kevin felt a wave of fear wash over him. He took a step back, and the figure suddenly slammed its hand against the glass, making Kevin yelp. "Let me in," a raspy voice demanded. Kevin shook his head. "I can't do that. Please leave." The figure slammed the door again, harder this time. Kevin could see its face now, a pale, twisted visage with hollow eyes. Panic surged through him as he backed away. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and the figure was gone. Kevin rushed to the door and locked it, his hands trembling. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew he couldn't stay there. He grabbed his things and decided to leave early. As he stepped outside, the cold air hit him like a slap. He glanced around nervously, then hurried to his car. As he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. When he got home, he double-checked all the locks and tried to sleep, but the face of the figure haunted his dreams. The next morning, Kevin called his boss and quit his job. He couldn't explain what had happened, but he knew he could never go back. The night shift had become something far more sinister than he could handle. Months later, Kevin learned that the store had been built on the site of an old asylum. The locals said the spirits of the former patients still roamed the area, seeking revenge on anyone who disturbed their rest. Kevin never spoke of his experience again, but he couldn't forget the terror he felt that night. And every time he passed by the store, he couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, half expecting to see the pale, twisted face staring back at him.